So hello, everyone. My name is Maurice Hamilton, and I am the CEO and managing partner of Infinovate Consultancy Services, where we do IT better. Infinovate has a rich 20-year history as a national certified minority-owned IT solutions and consulting firm. Our core solutions concentrate in business process automation, digital transformation, and cybersecurity fortification. I'd like to welcome and thank everyone for joining me today for our live podcast. And we really want to thank you and appreciate your time. As we move through the podcast, please feel free to post your questions and comments in the Q&A section located at the bottom of the screen, and our moderators will share these during the Q&A session during the last 10 minutes of the stream. If we cannot get to your questions, please feel free to share your email address, and we will follow up as soon as possible. You can also email us at info@infinovate.com, and I believe you do see the info@infinovate.com on the Infinovate logo there. For today's topic, we will speak on the advantages of having a cybersecurity plan in place and the dangers of operating naked OS environments. I am joined by three cybersecurity experts and our very own industry partner, CPI Systems. CPI Systems is based in South Carolina, encompassing 30 years plus of cybersecurity knowledge with many projects completed across many industries. I have the distinct pleasure to introduce Jim Goodrich, Vicki Delaney, and Infinovate's own Steve Boyd. Welcome, everyone. Jim and Vicki are co-founders of CPI Systems, and CPI stands for Continuous Process Improvement Systems, a CMMC accreditation board registered provider organization. Vicki Delaney has 38 years of experience in manufacturing and business management systems. Vicki is also a ISO consultant, a registered CMMC accreditation board practitioner, and she has conducted over 25 Nist 800-171 assessments. Vicki has assessed over 300 manufacturers. That's amazing. Jim Goodrich has over 30 years of business management experience, which includes over 25 Nist 800-171 assessments. Jim is a CMMC accreditation board registered practitioner. Jim is also a ISO 27001 lead assessor. Steve Boyd is Infinovate's Vice President of Contracts and Compliance. His expertise in IT solutions spans over 30 years. That includes aerospace and defense, manufacturing, engineering, aircraft, as well as many other verticals. So welcome, panelists. We're really happy with that.
Thank you.
All right. I want to start off and begin with a poll, or not a poll. We'll get to the poll later. But I want to start off with an article or memorandum that was released earlier this month by the Department of Justice, and specifically the Office of Public Affairs. And this is a memorandum from Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, and she's announcing a new civil cyber fraud initiative. And I want to read what she put inside this memorandum. So I'm going to begin with a quote. For too long, companies have chosen silence under the mistaken belief that it is less risky to hide a breach than to bring it forward and report it, said Deputy Attorney General Monaco. Well, that changes today. We are announcing today that we will use our civil enforcement tools to pursue companies, those who are government contractors who receive federal funds when they fail to follow required cybersecurity standards, because we know that puts all of us at risk. This is a tool that we have to ensure that taxpayer dollars are used appropriately and guard against public fiscal and public trust, end quotes. And also in the memorandum that she points out that the initiative would hold accountable entities or individuals that put U.S. information or systems at risk by knowingly providing deficient cybersecurity products or services, knowingly misrepresenting their cybersecurity practices or protocols, or knowingly violating obligations to monitor and report cybersecurity incidents and breaches. Kind of similar to what we talked about there a few minutes ago.
Right.
So as we mentioned, that today we're going to speak to the advantages of having a cybersecurity plan in place and the dangers of operating in naked OS environments. Let's speak to the first part of that, and with the first sentence there, advantages of having a cybersecurity plan in place. So at the end of the day, we know that cybersecurity fortification is essential. The question is that I will propose out there would be many business owners. I think that there's two things that they probably want to have answers to. One, they want to understand how cybersecurity impacts their business, and two, how can they protect their business in the most effective manner as possible. So I want to address the first question to Vicki. Jim and Steve, please feel free to chime in. Vicky, why do you believe it's important to have a robust cybersecurity plan that's fully operational in place?
Well, thank you, Maurice. The first reason is if you ever gone on a trip without a map, it's absolute chaos. It might be fun when it starts, but if you find out you run out of gas in the middle of the desert, you might rethink it. Well, it's the same thing with a robust cybersecurity plan. If you have no map or plan as to how you are going to implement your cybersecurity controls, as well as not just implement them, but to maintain them and to ensure by doing audits or assessments that your controls continue to be maintained, your company is forever going to be at risk. And so when you think about that, the risk transfers to one big thing, money. If your business is not up and running, and let's face it, we are all very dependent on the internet and our digital lifestyle. And if you do not have a robust cybersecurity plan, that's going to go away. How many of you remember the first time the power went out? And I remember that from a hurricane in New Jersey, 11 days of no power. Withdrawal is painful. So the same thing can happen to you with your company if you do not have a robust security plan, because it's the only way that you can track and implement and control the results, as well as it's extremely important for your organization to have that information so that everybody knows what path you're following and what responsibilities they have. So if you don't have a robust cybersecurity plan, I'd suggest you might want to think about the last power outage and think about what that does to your bottom line. You need a robust cybersecurity plan.
Amen.
That is so true, and I well said, Vicki. And I would just add that as a manager, you really want to shine a spotlight on all the risk that you have. And in the last few years, we're identifying many risks from cybersecurity that can just shut a business down. So a good plan will actually allow you to shine a spotlight on that risk and to see where are our weak spots, where are our vulnerable spots. The importance of it can't be stressed enough.
Right. Yeah, and one other point there, any good plan will identify the positive steps we want to take. And whether we're a large company or a very small company, we need to make sure we are prepared for those. But also the plan will identify unplanned activity that is going to create a problem. For instance, if I have a small motorboat in the harbor, I can turn very quickly. So I can react quickly to a situation. But some of my processes internally take a bit more time to manipulate and control. So if I'm on an aircraft carrier, for instance, I can't turn it very quickly. I need a whole lot of room and a whole lot of preparation. That's part of the importance of the plan.
Awesome. And what I want to do, if we can put a poll out there real quick, and we have a question for our audience there, and let's see if we can get this poll queued up here. And the poll questions will be how many listeners out there have a fully functional cybersecurity plan in operation that includes full monitoring, remediation, policies and procedures, and daily backup of your data, meaning that if a breach was to occur, you have processes in place to remediate, notify your customers, notify your vendors, notify your suppliers, and bring your data back online quickly. Let's see if we can actually get that poll going there. I'll announce the results in a few minutes here. But you know what? While that's actually calculating here, let's actually go over to Jim. I want to, and you mentioned about the SSP, and I want to chat about that for a few seconds here. Jim, can you tell our listeners, how does SSP work? What does SSP do? And what should listeners expect as a deliverable when the system security plan or SSP has been completed?
Yeah, that's a great key question, Maurice. Thank you. SSP or System Security Plan is very important, whether you're a large company or whether you're a small company. Most small companies have limited bandwidth, but there are affordable options to put that plan into place. And I'll share some tools that may help you, do it yourself or do this yourself. First of all, you'd have to realize that the importance of it. We all have a basic responsibility to safeguard sensitive information. This includes your own organization's intellectual property, along with especially your client information, and it extends to your supplier information and your employee information, such as personal or medical records. So all types of these are sensitive information, and the National Archive website defines many types of sensitive information. It's a government site. They're listed under controlled unclassified information categories, but they apply to all of us in our businesses. And that website is at archives.gov/CUI. So what is a system security plan and what are the basic elements? What it does, of course, is to allow you to proactively manage your risk. And it shows your current cybersecurity position. Where are you now? It does this by including an assessment of your current controls and practices compared to a standard or a set of best practices. Your client requirements may dictate which standard to use, but there are a number of standards out there. The National Institute of Science and Technology has a very good model, the Nist 800-171 assessment model, and that includes 110 controls and practices over 17 areas called domains. These are areas like access control, media protection, incident response, physical security, and employee training. This basic assessment shows current gaps, and then a gap assessment leads to a plan of action for improvement, which is your roadmap for moving forward. So it has those three basics of my current position, my gap analysis, and my plan for moving forward. The SSP also identifies how sensitive data is processed, stored, and transmitted. It helps you identify areas where the scope of sensitive data flow could be limited in order to decrease your exposure and your risk. So a good SSP includes both people, and technical aspects. So we mentioned for the do-it-yourselfers, a good place to start is with your own org chart. So take your organization chart, add extra boxes for clients and suppliers, and then draw lines that describe what type of data flows from the client, say, through different roles in your organization. For instance, what data flows from the client to the sales, design, production, shipping, quality control, and so on. And now remember to include your suppliers, because as we pass work along to the suppliers, your client requirements will be passed to them or part of those. And the responsibility remains with you as an organization to make sure that that sensitive data is handled properly within your supplier group as well. So now focusing on the sensitive information in that system security plan, this helps define who sees, processes, or transmits this sensitive data. As you start mapping that out, and I would just take, on a big piece of paper and start drawing that out, starting with your org chart, and then on the lines connecting positions, you can show what kind of data is processed. Am I using, am I sending contract data? Am I sending plans, specs, bills of material? Who sees what? This is all sensitive information.
Right.
Then ask the question, does everyone need that type of access? The basic risk control here is that that access should be limited to only those positions that need to see it. Otherwise, you introduce a vulnerability and risk that's unneeded. So there are privileged accounts, permissions, folder access for that sensitive data. And another big area for privileged accounts and sensitivity is administrative rights. Who has your admin rights? Maybe the CEO or president was the administrator when it was a 2-person company. But now that you're a 20-person company, does the CEO or president still need that level of access? This introduces an area of exposure, because it's so easy for a CEO, a president, any employee to open a link that could introduce a data breach. So this really is about risk management. The next step would be to list an inventory of all your hardware, your software, and your firmware. You might have that inventory listed in your finance group, but you'll also want to add all the software and what are all the settings. Remember to include other devices such as handheld devices, routers, switches, your firewalls, and then how are all those connected? So this is another picture you can draw. If you're a larger company, it gets a little tougher, but at the end of the day, you really need a good inventory list of all that hardware, software, firmware. You'll also need a good list, you put it on the same list, as far as what are the current settings and configurations. This is tough to get right for most companies unless you have help. And keep in mind that manufacturers, you might also have production equipment, and that with programs that process drawings and specs on the workroom floor. This all needs to be included. And then most of us use some type of operating system like Microsoft, and you may have also specialized software for your business. It's all included in that inventory list, along with the current configuration settings and controls. So that all needs to be controlled. This can also be used as a change management tool by showing, okay, we have a new need. We need to change a setting or configuration or add a new piece of equipment or software. That also has to be tracked and authorized so that it's controlled. So we have that change management piece to that. Again, most companies do not have the optimal settings and configurations for information security. Here is where companies like Infinovate employ tools and processes that can do all this for you, along with the optimal settings and configurations, easily pull up your inventory list, your IP addresses, and so on. So we've talked a little bit about the technical aspects and configurations. The people aspects are very important as well. What are the information security policies and procedures that govern the use of IT assets? Have these actually been defined? We're finding many companies don't have these currently defined. And then do the employees understand their information security responsibilities? And are they trained? Do you have a training program to show them good cyber hygiene for their roles? And, of course, we're all starting to become aware of the common breaches, the phishing and smishing. But, training and formal training is so important here. So all of this together gives you a current picture. Keep in mind that companies like CPI Systems specialize in affordable assessment and security policies, procedures, and training for small to medium companies. So with this current picture, the basic gap assessment and the plan of action, these are the important pieces of your system security plan.
Hmm.
Great information, Jim. And also to let our listeners know that you can reach out to us at info@infinivate.com. And we're actually offering I don't want to use the word free, but I don't like that word, but we'll use the word no charge, a consultation. So we'll sit down with you. We'll map out pretty much the basics of what Jim just mentioned there, and we'll map something together and put a plan in place for you all. So I want to actually show the poll results so everybody can see that information. Does your organization have a cybersecurity process and program in place? And you can see that most companies from this particular the respondents said they do not have that information, and that's where we come into play. We want to help you with that information. So thank you for responding to that poll. Um, as a reminder, please submit your questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Don't forget to like us on social media and subscribe to us so that way you will be notified of any future podcasts that we have with this type of information. So thank you, everyone. I want to actually go back and go back to the second part of that question or title, and that was the dangers of operating a naked OS environment. And Steve, why do you think it's so critically dangerous to operate a naked OS? And what can our listeners do to help mitigate such pernicious cybersecurity threats?
You know, very good point, very good question. And I love your choice of the word pernicious. Now, pernicious, that's a harmful effect in a very subtle way. And truly, that is the way cybersecurity breaches occur. It happens whether we're large or small, whether we've got 100% attention to what's going on, or we're just operating in an environment where we don't have a plan. We need to figure out how we can monitor the security measures that we have in place. And like Jim pointed out, our SSP can be very in-depth and have a whole lot of moving parts. But one of the big things we want to remember is that all of those moving parts create doors and windows into our system. And just like we don't want somebody walking into our facility and walking out with a piece of information or one of our products, we also don't want them looking over our shoulder and seeing what we're doing. So we need to protect our materials, our products, and we want to take care of that. So we don't want, for instance, our family members posting their favorite cookie recipe on our corporate laptop. We don't want to use our company cell phones to arrange that golf tournament we're going to have with our friends over the weekend. We need to make sure we protect and close those doors and windows. And that kind of sets my mind to an incident that I encountered a few years back. I was in the San Francisco Bay Area working at a foundry location, helping them with some of their setup. And this particular company had an internal foundry for semiconductor manufacturing, which included a lot of toxic chemicals and gases and various other processing. Of course, the fire department and local city codes require that they have an earthquake detector, that when there was a earthquake detected at a minimum, I think of a 3.0, it would shut down all the equipment, turn on all the ventilation, and go into a safe protect mode. The fire department, of course, required that this utility door that opened into this equipment be open 24/7 for the fire department to have access to it. Now, this particular company had spent a whole lot of money with security. They had cameras and door locks and card readers and all kinds of access controls for authorized people only to be able to get in the facility. One day I was just out walking around the campus and I checked the doors and I went, all of them were locked and I could not get in. All the windows had protective coverings on them. I went around the utility room and opened that door, which was supposed to be open, stepped into the equipment utility room, and immediately I had access into the manufacturing facility with no controls, no door locks, nothing. So that was a situation to where we had an open door into the facility that quite frankly, none of the senior management in the company were aware of. So in the cyber world, that is critically dangerous, and we need to make sure that we keep all our doors and windows under control.
Thanks, Steve. That's a great example. I really appreciate that. And Jim, I just want to kind of follow up real quick because you gave our listeners some information here. You mentioned that they could start with an org chart. You mentioned that take a look at the data, identify what kind of data they have and who has admin rights to the data, make a list of the hardware and software. So if we look at the SSP, and we want to say, how can our users actually, if they were to get engaged with that particular that process and they actually map everything out, how would they actually take it to the next step? What would that include for us to actually get involved with it? Can you actually give them some after they gather that? What would be the next steps from that? Moving on.
Yes, that's a great question, Maurice, and I really like Steve's analogy there about the open doors. We have open doors into our own systems that we're not even aware of, and at the same time, we have client requirements that we may not be aware of, and quite often are not. There are regulatory and statutory requirements that apply to data protection that affect all of us. There are also requirements for just making sure that those doors are all closed. And that applies, otherwise you're exposing your client to risk, your employee, it could be your supplier, employee, everybody. So the unknown risk is what's so important there. And it's so hard to track. So all those open doors, one, great way to do this is to really start with your clients and have that big discussion. Sometimes it's a difficult discussion about saying, what really are those requirements? For instance, we're finding with supporting dozens of Department of Defense clients that whether it's Department of Defense agency or a prime contractor or another subcontractor, somebody within that supply chain, that those requirements have not typically been passed down explicitly. So need to almost have that conversation with that contract officer, that client, and to make sure that those requirements are passed down. I mentioned the government contracts, the FAR or DFARS clauses will apply to them. And that FAR is, of course, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and DFAR is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations. There are clauses within the contracts that you'll want to ask your client if you're working on government contracts of any sort to make sure that those are fully understood. And so all of these requirements will direct your activities. Again, as you start, you'll need that standard, and a Nist standard, Nist 800-171 will also apply to commercial markets. Those are general areas, domains to shore up your cybersecurity. So again, the starting point would be really try to dig deep to understand what are those requirements.
Okay, excellent. So we've actually outlined a few steps here that our listeners can actually take to protect and fortify their environments. And I want to touch base on three real quick. The first one was risk. And we know it begins with self-realization that you have to, and you should conduct the SSP. Vicki, you talked about why earlier. What is the risk of not having a SSP perform?
Well, the big risk, of course, is, as I said, is that a loss of income for the company. And it certainly affects the impression of the world of their business operations. We were talking before this meeting about T-Mobile having a breach, and Maury says he won't sign up with T-Mobile because they had a breach. Well, that's probably a perfect example of a risk. because your responsibility for your company is to keep it alive and vital. And so if you do not take the time to explore the regulatory requirements, just like Jim said, they can be elusive. You can be reading the small print and it's putting you to sleep, but that lack of attention could definitely be a huge risk for you. So what I would say, dealing with most of these small companies that we work with, the only reason they know now that they have to have a cybersecurity system is because their clients are literally sending them a message that says you will do this or else. But how many other clients that you have these same requirements and you don't know about it? So in my mind, the biggest risk, well, there's two big risks. It's your potential customers' impression of you and how you're going to protect their information. Intellectual property is a huge issue for being protected, because we know that the breaches that happen are aimed at intellectual property. So if you do not have a system security plan or even just basic cybersecurity, you're putting your clients at risk, and you're actually opening yourself up to legal action. So I would encourage you to do a risk assessment of not just your cybersecurity, but all of the activities that you are going through within your company, as to non-digital breaches, where somebody in your company, somebody approaches them and says, hey, give me your password and I'll do this and I'll give you $100. It's difficult to keep track of that. But if you haven't sat down and listed all the possible risks, and remember this, you don't know what you don't know. So it's important, if you're doing this, get somebody else to do it with you. Right. Because they can bring to the table maybe those questions that you never thought to ask. The other thing is to get online. There is I don't know whether it's government or central alert system that tells you all the different types of cybersecurity breaches or hackers that have been going on, and just look at it and ask yourself, is there anything about my system that could be at risk here? So the key word to all of the things we're talking about here is risk. The risk of the loss of income, the risk of loss of beneficial impressions of your clients, and literally the risk of losing your business.
We can talk about that in another podcast, just that subject alone, risk. Yes. And you just said the key element there, the risk of losing your business. So we have a few minutes here. I have a couple more questions. By the way, listeners, if you have any questions that you would like to have our panel answer for you, please feel free to post them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to those. So please post a couple of questions there for us. I'm going to go back real quick with Jim, you were talking about how you have to look at your infrastructure, review it. I want to use the word review. And we're talking about legal and government regulations, and heck, you can even have requirements given to you by your board of directors or other stakeholders in the business. And it starts with, ask yourself, are you adequately protected? Jim, can you elaborate how important that question is?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The importance of that of that protection just can't be overstated. So again, this is something where we just sit down with what does the current picture look like, and and really, I can mention a good business wants to see, all the good, the bad, and the ugly, especially. I've worked for managers that didn't want to hear the bad news. They want, maybe you to take care of it. the risk there is that it's not completely taken care of. So, like you mentioned, Maurice, the infrastructure, list all your infrastructure and then list how it's all connected, because now we're so interconnected. The whole world is interconnected. Devices speak to each other. Automated systems trigger something that turns on a heating system, a cooling system, parts of a utility system. So understand your complete infrastructure, understand how it's all connected. What are the settings in place? What are the configurations for all the software, the firmware that communicates all of that? Understand what your encryption system is about. Do I have a good established encryption system along with a key to unlock it at the other side? We're a little spoiled with Microsoft and other systems, at least in their commercial systems, will have some basic encryption in place. So all that infrastructure, how it's connected, the complexity of it, just start simple and put all your devices, your computers, routers, if you have an on-prem server, all of that. Start with that just to get a current picture, and then take any step. Sometimes taking the wrong step will lead us to the right step. Vicki mentioned having third-party eyes take a look at it. This is so important. I would really encourage everybody to take advantage of that, of whatever free or no cost types of assessments that you can get. Compare contractors. There may be some contractors that are directed at very large companies, and you're a smaller company with 20 or less, 50 or less people, and they may not be your best third-party provider. So start somewhere, I guess, would be my advice.
Excellent. Thank you. And Steve, I would like to pose the last question over to you. And if it asks, how will you answer this question? Or if your customers ask you to define your cybersecurity plan, why is that a very important question? If some of our listeners out there and some of their vendors or suppliers came to them and say, hey, I need to see your cybersecurity plan. Why is it important to actually have preparation for that question?
That's a great question, Maurice. As you pointed out when we first started, Department of Justice is beginning to enact penalties against companies that are not following the process. So, whether we're large or small, we have to be able to explain the process we are following. What are we doing to protect our data? What are we doing to protect your data that is in our system that we use to produce the products we make for you? How are we protecting your information? We've talked about the SSP. We've talked about the action items to make sure our doors and windows are controlled. We've talked about having all the safeguards in place. We just need to be able to explain that. And Vicki made a really excellent point earlier when she said, you just don't know what you don't know. Well, in today's society, we have to know. We're held responsible if there's a mistake or a problem, and saying, I didn't know, I'm sorry, doesn't cut it anymore. I remember in college, I had a business law professor that had a very unique way of teaching. And one of his anomalies, if you will, was the test. Now, all of his tests were multiple guess, and there were 2 or 3 choices that we would make to answer the question. And of course, if we answered correctly, we got 1 point. If we answered incorrectly, he took away 1 point. But also, if we didn't answer at all, either because we didn't know the answer or we just didn't have time to get to the question, he took away 2 points. So going into the scenario, we were in a negative position that we had to be very aware and conscious of everything so that we could stand muster to the question to pass the test. Now, in cybersecurity, that's extremely important. We not only have to be prepared against intrusion, we have to put safeguards in place, but we have to make sure that we locate those cybersecurity experts to help us understand what we don't know, because they do know. We know. The people at CPI Systems, Vicki and Jim, they know. We know here at ICS. So we, as these experts, can help us all navigate through our security system. The point here is, if we don't know where our weaknesses are, we're pretty much providing an open door. That's not good.
Right. You're 100% correct about that. Excellent information. It looks like we're pretty much out of time here. So I want to remind our listeners and viewers that if you can send an email to info@infinivate.com, info@infinivate.com, we are going to provide a no charge cybersecurity consultation. I don't want to say free, it's a no charge cybersecurity consultation. So we'll sit down, and a lot of the information that we went through, we'll kind of like touch the bases on it. We'll collect some data, collect the information. Vicki, Jim, Steve, and our security specialist will get back to you and draft some kind of blueprint and let you know how we can actually fortify your infrastructure. We don't have any questions right now, so we just want to thank everyone. And please do not forget to hit that like button, follow us on social media, subscribe so that you will be notified of future podcasts, because we plan on having a lot more. And we just want to thank everyone for attending. I'm your host, Maurice Hamilton with Infinivate Consultancy Services, and we want to let everyone know that we appreciate your valuable time. We are confident that we can make a difference protecting your infrastructure, and everyone, please make it a great day. Thanks for everything, and we'll talk to everyone soon.